returning to a home that no longer exists. My name is Martha. I'm 68 years old, and the older I get, the more I realize there are places we should never return to, especially when those places no longer belong to us. I've lived in Seattle for over 40 years now, but I was born in a small town near Missouri. I have 2 grown children and 4 grandchildren. My husband, George, passed away 8 years ago. Since then, my days have been quiet, wrapped in habits and memories. I read, I embroider, and I go for walks, mostly alone. A few weeks ago, I received a letter. Yes, a real one, not an email. A paper envelope, slightly yellowed, with a Missouri postmark in handwriting I recognized instantly. Martha, come back. The house is still standing, and it's waiting for you. No signature, no explanation. Just an address, 114 Evergreen Lane, Mount Carmel. My heart clenched. I hadn't set foot in that part of the world since 1985. All my life, I had run from that street, where time had frozen along with the image of my father standing at the gate, waving as I left for college in Seattle. Back then, I thought I was leaving for good. The house was meant to live in my memory, not in reality. Because memories, we can reshape them. But reality can hurt. I sat on a plane to St. Louis with trembling fingers. I've flown many times before, but this was different. This wasn't just a trip. It was a return to a layer of the past where my heart had once grown roots. From St. Louis, I drove a rental car. Almost 3 hours of open road, fields, forests, and eventually, familiar landscapes. I recognized the trees, the farms, even the old bus stop that nobody had ever torn down. And then I turned onto that street, Evergreen Lane. The air smelled of damp grass. Something inside me tightened. Almost nothing had changed, except the people. The people who once filled these places with life were gone. And there it stood, the house. The same one, with creaky steps, peeling windows, and a yard overtaken by time. My hand shook as I reached under the empty flower pot by the porch, right where my father used to keep the key. It was still there. I opened the door. Inside, it was quiet. Like time had paused. The scent of dust, old wood, and something else. Something familiar. Something warm. The old couch. The radio in the kitchen. The drawer with the same mismatched spoons. I sat down at the kitchen table and cried like a girl who had been allowed to visit her once upon a time. That's when I saw her, Mrs. Henrietta, the neighbor, peeking through the hedge. She looked older, of course, but she recognized me. Martha? Is that really you? She asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. Yes, I said softly. It's me. You've come home, child, and in that moment, I understood. I hadn't just arrived. I had returned. But had I returned to a house, or to a version of myself? That I still had to find out. Because some homes no longer exist. And yet, sometimes, those are the very places we need to visit, to remember who we once were. The next morning, I woke to sunlight, streaming through the half-drawn curtains of the room where my younger sister Alice used to sleep. The wind creaked the window frame, and another wave of the past washed over me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadow of the old cherry tree sway on the wall. This house remembered us. Even the walls did. I made myself coffee on the ancient stove. Somehow, it still worked. On the kitchen shelf stood a jar labeled sugar, but it held rice. Just like it used to. As if Mom had moved it yesterday. I sat on the porch with my coffee in hand. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and chimney smoke. A dog barked in the distance. Everything was familiar, but as if viewed through the soft blur of an old movie. Mrs. Henrietta appeared again, this time with a small basket. I brought you some fresh baked goods. Remember how much you loved those cinnamon rolls? I do remember. She sat down beside me, and we said nothing for 10 full minutes. Just sat. Then she spoke. Did you know old Mr. Milton doesn't live across the street anymore? His son sold the place. I saw. There's a new roof. There aren't many of us left. But your house, it waited. It waited for you. Something tugged at my chest. I looked at the chipped paint on the porch rail, at the rusty doorbell. This house, it had waited. Waited for me, or at least, for the memory of me. "Did you get a letter?" Henrietta asked, casually, like it didn't mean much. I looked up. "Yes. But I don't know who sent it." "You have no idea?" she said, raising an eyebrow. And she said nothing more. I spent the day going through old things. Photographs in the drawer by the bed, letters to George the First had written but never sent. My graduation album, a doll with a broken arm, Lizzie. I carried her with me until I was 8. She still smelled faintly of lavender. I had left all of this behind once, because I wanted to forget. That evening, I stepped outside again. The moon was high and bright, and I noticed something hanging on the gate. A small envelope. Again, no signature. Inside, an old black and white photograph. Me and Dad, sitting on that same bench by the house. I was holding an ice cream cone, and he had his arm around me. In the background were trees, the same ones still growing there today. On the back, it said, "Remember, roots don't die. They just go deeper." A chill ran through me. Not from the wind, from the memories, from the feeling that someone was close, that someone knew I was here, and that someone wanted me to stay. And suddenly I understood, this trip wasn't just about returning to a house. It was a journey inward. Into childhood, into loss, into the pain I'd buried for years. Into the questions I'd never dared to ask, afraid of the answers. And even though I didn't know who had reminded me of Evergreen Lane, or why now, I knew I had to find out. Because sometimes life gives you a second chance, even if it's just the chance to finally close a door that's been open to the past for too long. The next morning I woke up in the same bed where I used to fall asleep to the sound of Mom reading or the patter of rain on the roof. The sheets were clean, though a little yellowed with time, and smelled of time and old memories. The window was cracked open, letting in fresh morning air with the faint scent of damp earth. It wasn't an alarm or worry that woke me, it was a bird's song. Soft and simple, as if whispering, "You're home, Martha. Breathe." I sat in the quiet, watching the light filter through the curtains. And then, like a scene from an old film, I remembered, Dad always kept his old journal in the drawer of his nightstand. I got up, walked barefoot across the wooden floor, it still creaked in the same spot, and pulled the copper handle. There it was. The edges slightly singed, the cover faded, 1959 to 1972. I sat on the bed, holding it like a relic. Opened it at random. Dad had written about Mom. My eyes filled with tears. It was too honest. Too intimate. And yet, it was mine. And then, something strange. Between the pages I found another letter, neatly folded. But it wasn't in Dad's handwriting. It was addressed to me. To me, with the date, 1983. Martha, if you ever come back, know this, I always waited. And if this house still stands, it means I'm still here too. Yours, T. My heart skipped a beat. I felt chills run down my spine. Who was T? It wasn't Dad's writing. Not Mom's either, I would have recognized it. But the handwriting was familiar. Very. Then it came back to me. In high school, I used to write letters back and forth with a boy named Tommy. We shared a desk senior year. He was shy, always wore sweaters even in the heat, and wrote beautiful poetry. We exchanged notes, and one day he gave me a letter, one I never read. Because I left for Seattle and never came back. I remember promising to write him, but I lost the address. Could it be him? I felt like a schoolgirl again, someone had just confessed a first love. It was ridiculous, 40 years had passed. But when I read those words again, something shifted inside me, like someone had turned the light back on. I decided to walk into town. I needed answers. I put on my favorite light blue shirt and stepped outside. The street was nearly empty. Neighboring houses were quiet. But when I turned the corner, I saw the cafe on the corner was still open. Ginger's Place, the same sign. Faded now, but still familiar. I walked inside. It looked like time had stopped. Local 70s music played, a jukebox stood in the corner, and the scent of cinnamon hung in the air. "Coffee?" asked the waitress with big curly red hair. "Yes, please. And toast with jam, if you still have some." "We always do," she smiled. "You new around here?" "Not exactly. Just haven't been here in a long while." "Oh, then you must be from the Evergreen Place? That house up on the hill?" I nodded. "Someone moved back in?" "I saw the light last night." "That was me, Martha. Martha Reynolds." Her eyes widened in surprise, then she gasped. "Sweet saints! Tommy Reynolds used to talk about you all the time." "You're that Martha?" I smiled. "I guess I am. You know, he's still around." "Well, not exactly here, he lives nearby. Still comes in for his black coffee. Never married, can you believe that?" My heart did that odd little flip again. I sat there, staring into the coffee mug in front of me, as 1,000 possible outcomes played out in my mind. Maybe this house really had been waiting for me. But maybe it wasn't just the house. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the old curtains. The air smelled of coffee and wood. I walked downstairs barefoot, the same creaky floorboards, the same kettle my dad once fixed with tape. Everything felt almost unchanged, and yet, completely different. That day, I decided to walk down the street. Mrs. Henrietta had suggested I stop by the library. It was still open. I didn't expect to see anything special, but sometimes memory hides not in things, but in faces. At the entrance, an elderly woman with short gray hair greeted me. She looked at me and suddenly smiled. "You're Martha Watson, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes, but how did you?" I hesitated. "I'm Junie Perkins. We were in the same class. Remember? You always sat by the window." I laughed. Her voice, though older, was familiar. We hugged like old friends just rediscovered. "How long have you been back?" she asked, leading me through the shelves. "Yesterday. But I don't know if it's for long. I got a letter. No name. And something made me come." "Maybe the house itself wrote it," Junie joked. "In this town, some things find you when the time is right." We talked for a long while. She told me how, after her husband died, she stayed alone, and the library became her second home. How neighbors changed, but some things always remained, memories. "Want to see the photo archive?" she asked. "We keep old school pictures, newspaper clippings." I nodded, and we went down to a small archive room. There, among yellowed albums, I saw my childhood. Class photos, a newspaper article about my father. Turns out, he was named Man of the Year in 1972 for his charity work. I never knew that. As I flipped through the pages, I stopped at a photo from 1967. I was standing there with Junie and another boy, Sam Carter. My heart skipped. I hadn't seen him since the summer we said goodbye at the bus stop. Sam still lives here, spent his life working at the local mill. He married once, but he's been a widower for years, Junie said. I felt something old and warm stir inside me. Maybe some things never really end, they just wait for their time. And maybe a house, even one that no longer stands, knows exactly when it's time to come home. My name is Martha. I'm 68. I didn't come back to Mount Carmel for the house. I came for a part of myself I left long ago between the old walls of Evergreen Lane. That part had stayed silent for years. But now, it began to speak. The days I spent in that old house opened something deeper than I expected. I walked through empty rooms, touched faded wallpaper, breathed in the scent of wood and dust, as if I were looking for proof that it was all real. That I was really here. That I was still the girl I used to be. In the pantry, I found old letters from my father, packed in a tin cookie box, tied with a cotton ribbon. He had written to me, even when I didn't write back. To Marty, who will always be my little girl. He wrote about Mom, about the weather, about the neighbors. But between the lines, there was sorrow. And I felt guilt. All these years I wasn't here. I didn't just run away from the town, I ran from the one who waited the most. I never got the chance to say I loved him. I didn't cry. I just sat on the kitchen floor and let my heart be quiet. There, where we once laughed with Mom, cooked cherry jam, sang to Dad's old radio, there was silence now. But not emptiness. It would never be empty again. I stepped onto the porch. The sunset cast long shadows down the road. Evergreen Lane wasn't the street of my childhood anymore, it had become the street of my return. I knew it was time to go back. But I would take with me more than I had brought. I would take the house where I was loved. And the feeling that even when you've been gone for years, someone still waits for you. Before leaving, I walked through the rooms one last time. Circled the old yard. Touched the bark of the same maple tree we used to play hide-and-seek under. And I whispered, "Thank you. Because you don't always have to leave something behind to return. Sometimes, you just need to remember. And let memory be your bridge home." That morning, I locked the door. Left the key under the flower pot, just like Dad used to. And I walked away, lightly, peacefully, with the knowledge that time doesn't kill love. It just helps it become a part of who we are. When I returned to Seattle, my kids greeted me. I hugged each of them longer than usual. They didn't know I had found a piece of myself I once lost. But I knew. And that was enough. At home, in my favorite chair, I closed my eyes. And I saw that house. Old, creaky, but real. And it lived in me. Thank you for being here with me. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, share it with someone who cherishes family memories. And subscribe to Golden Moments. There are more tender, true stories to come. Because every moment is priceless. And the best stories are still ahead.